What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we were back. We're still back. And we're going to, we have a full off season. I know Josh Pate doesn't like the word off season, but a lot to talk about before the next season begins. And spring ball has started for a lot of schools last week, a lot of schools this week. So it's starting to look ahead to some spring headlines.
Yeah, that's definitely what this time of year is all about. There's hope for everybody. Everybody's turning over their roster, got some new, fresh spring battles. Definitely some, portal movement. We'll have another round of portal movement after spring practice, but spring practice has commenced began from several schools already this week. As we get into this, we start to get pictures of guys in pads, get all these freshmen who are early enrollees with numbers. And so you start to think, oh, wow, this guy's an actual football player instead of just this 5-star guy I saw, on 24/7 sports. So definitely exciting time of year, and definitely excited for what we're going to do tonight, which is kind of preview a few of those teams.
Yeah, you and I both picked 3 teams and an honorable mention because we couldn't stick to 3. And what are some teams that this is a make or break year? And maybe we define that a little bit differently by team. I know I did. I know I have a few different tiers of make or break years and what that means. But Daniel, let's dive right in. I'm going to let you kick us off. But again, we each picked 3 teams that this is a make or break year. So looking ahead to spring, what are we looking for? What defined it as a make or break year for that team? So we haven't told each other the teams, so we might have some overlap.
Should we start with our honorable mentions?
Yeah. Give me your honorable mention.
Just to get those. Okay, my honorable mention is Florida State.
Okay.
All right. I would put it out there. I like Florida State. I think that, Norvell is mostly because Norvell, this is entering year 4 now. Is it already year 4?
This year 3.
This is year 3. Okay. Gosh, it's just felt like an eternity already because of all the roster turnover and everything like that. But new coaches in both Florida and Miami, people are always coming down to Florida to just steal talent. So I think it's important that he utilizes his, he's the lowest profile coach based on, all the hype. He's got the least amount of hype of the big 3 in Florida. And so I do think it's very important for him to win 8 games this year. So I would put him on my list, but my criteria is a little bit different, which I'll dive into in just a second.
I like Florida State. It's year 3, and 5 years ago, this wouldn't be the case. But now that you're in year 3, this is your roster because of all your portal moves, stuff like that, recruiting. Like now it really is your roster by year 3. So right. I like that one. My throwaway is Auburn. Auburn. Do I need to say anything else of why it's a make or break year? It's funny. Harson's just acted like nothing ever happened. He's just been like, all right, yep, I'm the coach. Nothing happened. We're just moving right along.
Things are fine.
Yeah, we're fine. We're good. Things are good in Auburn. So I don't even know why I put them in the list. Yeah. Things are great there.
Yeah.
Auburn. Yeah. So that's why I didn't. And that's been said about Auburn. So we don't need to reopen that can. Daniel, let's get to the real ones. Tell me your first team, what the criteria was, and why it's a make or break year.
So I'm going to stay in the SEC West.
Okay. Ooh.
I've got LSU. All right. And I'm going to explain make or break. So for me, this is similar to what Jerry Seinfeld talked about, first class airplane flights. You don't know what you're missing, all right, if you've never flown on one. But once you have, you're going to be, thinking about it every time you fly if you're not in first class. So my criteria is my 3 teams are recent national championship winners. So they had to have won a national championship. They've had to have won a national championship in the playoff era. So that's why Florida State was just outside of it, because they were the year before that. I almost said make the college football playoff as my criteria, but they had to have won a recent national championship since the playoff began. So that's what I'm putting. The reason for LSU is I think that they need to win 10 games this year at a minimum.
Okay.
I think that this is there is a little bit of buy-in issue with the fan base think there's a decent amount of the fan base that is not sold on Kelly. And then they've also had 2 straight years of not just underperformance, but just embarrassing play by the LSU team. Whether you have big time players leaving, opt outs, you could excuse away one after that beautiful year they had in 2019 where they won the national championship, but after that it was a 5-loss season, and then I believe they lost 6 games last year. So back-to-back seasons of that's just not LSU football. They're 9-3, 10-2 every year, regardless of the roster. They are always going to have talent. So I think that Brian Kelly needs to come in. He needs to win. He needs to win big in some instances. I think that you can usually excuse away an Alabama loss or maybe even Texas A&M or whoever, but they need to beat teams that on a regular year they're profiled ahead of. I think that does 2 things. That re-legitimizes them because they're going to be back in that national championship conversation the next year and the years following, and it gets that buy-in for the fan base. Now, I'm not saying that LSU is going to be out as far as fan base. I don't think he's going to get fired after this year if he doesn't do well, but I think that he will be swimming upstream the rest of his career if he doesn't start out. If he starts out this year with 10 wins, then he'll have a lot more slack and he'll get a lot more pull in the same direction for the rest of his tenure at LSU.
Okay. You and I might have defined make or break differently. So what happens if they don't win 10 games this year? Like, do you think the fan base can be on fire if they don't go out and win?
Yeah. I think,
man,
I think you're over expecting. I think a lot of people are over. I don't think that LSU is going to fire him. I think he will be automatically on the hot seat next year. And it's going to be one of those, because I think that there's a large portion of the fan base who isn't sold on him because he was kind of acting phony. And it's like they just lost their guy who won their championship, but then they're also like, I think there's just it's a big division of the fan base. The fan base is like, hey, we got to get legitimate coach. Ed O wasn't the guy. And there's another part that's like, hey, this guy doesn't know Cajun football. So I think it's competing things, but winning heals all those problems. So that's why I put it at 10 wins. If he wins 10, I think there's no problems. If he wins, 9 games and one of their losses is to a team that they shouldn't lose to, maybe like a Mississippi State or someone like that, I think that there's still some questions about him going forward. If he wins 10, I think everybody's aligned heading into 2023.
10 wins is high. I don't know if they get to 10 this year. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I say that I'm not worried about Brian Kelly at all. Once the lights turn on and the pads go on and the whistle blows, LSU's going to play dang good football. You know why? Because Notre Dame played dang good football. Like, he is not appreciated enough for what he did at Notre Dame. And Marcus Freeman might do great, and Marcus Freeman might be a great coach, but Notre Dame cannot compete on the national level recruiting wise, like some of these like LSU can. That's why he went to LSU, because he knows he'll have the ability to win a national championship at LSU. So I'm excited for Brian Kelly. That's interesting. Okay.
Well, we're outside the fan base. I agree. I'm excited. Yeah. I think they're going to do great. It's that internal pressure.
I mean, look, Ole Miss, Bama, and Texas A&M. You lose those 3, you're at 9-3. I don't think it's a bad year.
Yeah, but I think traditionally they're slotted ahead of Ole Miss. I think that becomes a really big game this year, and they really should win. If you're LSU in a normal year, you're going to beat Ole Miss. So if Ole Miss beats you, I don't know.
SEC West is fun. I'm going to steal one of yours then, based on what you said. Clemson. It is a make or break year for Clemson, and here's why. Dabo lost his coordinators for like the first time in a decade. Like, that was a problem Clemson hadn't had, is their coaches stuck around. Like, Saban's had to replace coaches, Kirby's had to replace coaches, Ryan Day's had to replace coaches. Dabo hasn't had to do it yet. This is the first time. So, new trial for Dabo. It might go over fine, but we haven't seen it yet. Mm-hmm. We saw what Clemson looked like for the first time in 6 years when they didn't have a transcendent quarterback. And what they looked like was 9-3. So do they get transcendent quarterback play this year? And if not, what does that look like? Is it 9 wins again? Recruiting. There's a misconception with Clemson recruiting. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't off on this. I went back to just playoff era, AKA when Clemson's been really relevant. So I just want to tell you where their classes were, because there's this perception for some reason that it is just like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, like Georgia recruiting wise. And I'm like, one of those doesn't exactly fit. And here's why. 2014, 16th, 2015, 9th, 2016, 11th, 2017, 16th, 2018, 7, first top 10 under Dabo, 2019, 10th, 2020, 3, their best class, 2021, 5, this past season, 2022, 10. So they have not recruited at a transcendent level. They've just gotten quarterback right to this point. Now, DJ could have had as a bad year last year. He could wake up this year and be the 5-star that he is. Cade, how do you say his last name? Klubnik. He could come in and he's a 5-star. He could come in and have that transcendent quarterback play, and all the problems could be fixed. But I just think it's a make or break year. Like this is one of these, this could define the trajectory of Clemson football, because you're not recruiting that well compared to who you're being, compared to the Alabamas, Georgias, Ohio States, because that's who you're compared to when you're Clemson. Because you're not taking transfers like they are, like you have to do other things right. And last season they didn't. And so that's why I think it's a make or break year. I'm not saying they're going to fire Dabo if they get 9-3 again, but this could change the trajectory of Clemson football. Was last year the outlier, or was last year a sign of things to come if things don't change? I think this year we'll be able to see.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
That's my make or break.
Well, I'm glad. Obviously, you mentioned it. This is the one of the ones that I had, as you had definitely guessed. I'm looking at this, and I agree with everything you're saying. My biggest point would be, two things. It's two-pronged for me. It's, I think his number one issue, Dabo's number one issue, and again, this is two-time national championship coach Dabo Swinney, them talking about, his biggest issue is roster management. Number one. Number two, which this is a question, and I don't know if it's an issue yet. I don't know if this part is an issue. This is a question that we're going to have, and it is what you were talking about, which is the coaching staff. Is he going to be okay with new coaches? Is he hiring the right guys, promoting the right guys? Because whatever the case may be, that's going to be the next thing that we ridicule or we siphon through and see if he's done it right. They have to figure out quarterback, because that has covered up for some of their other deficiencies in years past. They do have still an elite defensive line coming back this year. So like, that's something to just hang your hat on. Clemson's still got dudes. And then you've talked about the third overall class, 2020, the fifth overall class, 2021. Those guys are just getting to be upperclassmen now. My issue, again, roster management. So Dabo has been selective his whole time, which in some ways I credit him, because he's got a standard and he sticks to it. So as far as his who he allows to come into the program is a certain character kid. Who he keeps is a certain character kid. He just keeps them the whole time. There are a lot of years, in those years that you mentioned, Jacob, where they were lower ranked, the number of recruits that they took was not a full 25. And so they may have had a decent, number, or, they still took several 3-stars that they're going to develop over that time, because they had the coaches to do that. They're also just not, he is, from a roster management perspective, this day and age of college football, especially with the transfer portal. Yes, it's important to utilize the transfer portal. It is also important to be able to, and this is the ugly side that no one likes to talk about, to out guys who shouldn't be on your roster, the guys who aren't talented enough. We're not talking about guys who are crap heads, who have an arrest or something like this, that have a standard or something like this, or who violate team rules. We're talking about guys who just can't simply make it. You need to be able to, whether it be pull their scholarship, encourage them to transfer, or ultimatum, whatever it is, or if they've, got an injury, have them medically retire, whatever it is, there's things that the top elite talent guys, roster managers, i.e., Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, these guys who every year they have transfers out, but those transfers out are the guys, not to be, negative about it, but largely those are guys that they have combed through and they are fine with leaving because they've got guys coming in right there to replace them. So it's two-pronged with the transfer portal. He needs to obviously accept guys that maybe can help turn over his roster quicker and upgrade their profile, but it's also on the outside, not just, if a guy leaves is one thing, but if he's got guys who just are being damaging to the 85-man roster, he's out here trying to play with 65 guys when, the Alabamas, Georgias, Ohio States of the world are playing with a full 85 roster. So it shouldn't come back. Now, with all of mine, I kind of gave a stipulation of what would be their make or break. So LSU, I said 10 wins or bust. This one, I said return to dominance or bust. So it's not just about wins necessarily. Now, Clemson has always, even before last year, has always had a close win or two in the season in the ACC. That's just kind of their wake-up call. But I'm saying that they should not lose more than one regular season game this year if they're going to return. If we're to expect that they are still of that upper echelon profile that they had been for the greater part of the playoff era. So
yeah. Go win the ACC.
That's where my Yeah, they need to win the ACC, and they need to have less than 2 losses in the ACC.
Who in the ACC is like your, oh my gosh, we have to watch out for them? Like, who is the big challenger? Honest to God, like this year, like Florida State's still rebuilding.
Like, no, NC State is their biggest challenger this year. And NC State's going to have a good year, but NC State having a good year is NC State maybe going 9-3, 10-2 at best. That's the ceiling, hitting the head on the ceiling. That, Clemson in this era has been an easy 11-1, and they had 2 years straight where they went undefeated in the regular season, and that's something that is not foreign to them. I do think that just the Klubnik being there, Cade Klubnik, I think first of all, if he starts, he's going to be great, but I also think that his presence pushing DJ and just that competition in and of itself
competition's
will
good.
Be better. So, but man, their offensive line has been their biggest issue. If they could have accepted some transfers, then they may have been able to turn a couple things around a little quicker, get some guys who are grown men rather than trying to develop freshmen. They get a guy, oh, hey, this guy's a 4th-year guy out of Georgia who's been buried by these guys. Hey, he could be a starter right now. They're not doing it. So, make or break for them. I guess so. That's mine. So yeah, you got your third, or that was your first?
That was my first. So I'll go
to
my second. I'll stay in the ACC, Georgia Tech. So, like, it's year 4 of Jeff Collins. We knew this would be a big rebuild, but I thought that year 3 you would need to start to show results. I will give COVID the benefit of the doubt and say, all right, this is your year 3 where you better show me results. He's yet to win more than 3 games, and he replaced a coach who got fired who averaged 7.5 wins a year, who won the ACC. So, like, 3 wins is not acceptable. Beyond that, I think Jeff Collins was supposed to come in and, like, he's this culture guy and, like, branding and marketing. Their best finish in recruiting is 27, and that was in 2020. The last 2 classes have ranked 48th and 53. You should be able to clean up the scraps in Atlanta and have a top 30 class. Like, no excuses there. Like literally clean up the scraps in Atlanta and have a top 30 class. So much different tier than Clemson, of course, but I think you have to make a bowl game this year for Georgia Tech. And if not, I do think it's time to move on from Jeff Collins. I know that it was a big rebuild, from a different style offense and stuff like that, but the defense hasn't been very good. He's a defensive guy. Again, you haven't won more than 3 games in a season. Like, you're losing to the likes of Northern Illinois. Like, so it's not like you're, okay, we got
Citadel.
our brains beat. Yeah. It's like, okay, we got our brains beat in by Clemson. That's expected. But you don't go lose to Northern Illinois at home. Like, you're paying them to come play you. So you don't lose those games in year 3. So
shout out to Coach Thomas Hammock, just saying.
That's right. Like, what is there to believe in Georgia Tech? Like with Jeff Collins, I don't get it. Like the marketing's there, but what are you marketing? And like it's a bad product.
Yeah, it's tough. I agree with you. He just replaced 6 out of his 10 assistants this offseason. So that's a big thing. They were one that I had on my bigger list when I was narrowing things down, but I was trying to figure out my criteria. But yeah, he's definitely someone you got to circle and say he's supposed to be this, yeah, like you said, culture guy, branding guy, recruiting guy. So at a minimum, do that. And he brought in Jeff Sims, and Jeff Sims hasn't really developed. He had injuries last year and a ton of turnovers his freshman year. If he can do something this year, that would be nice. But
you lost your best player.
You had Jahmyr Gibbs, and I gotta say there were several games last year where Gibbs was the best player on both teams on the field of teams that they played, and they just stopped giving him the ball for whatever reason. I remember against somebody, oh gosh, I can't remember who it was. He was at 11 yards a touch, and it was like, I think down the stretch they started throwing it and they weren't throwing it to him, and it just they lost the game. I can't remember exactly what game that was, but I mean they lost so many down the stretch that it's tough to remember. And that's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of peers for them in the ACC where there's a lot of wins to be had to get to 6 wins that it wouldn't take beating a Clemson. You can beat, the likes of Virginia, Virginia Tech, all these school, Duke. I mean, there are teams to beat in the ACC and then you add in your non-con outside of Georgia, you should be able to usually clean up with beating some lower tier teams. Now, I think you'll be able to do it. I don't know, but yeah, I agree. I think it's a good one to have on there. My last one, I think, is a little bit surprising. Make or break. Again, mine is they have to have a recent national championship. Have to have a recent national championship in the playoff era.
Ohio State.
It is Ohio State. Here's a reason. Look, I am a big Ohio State guy as far as I think that I'm very high on them this year and usually every year. I'm a big Ryan Day guy. I love his widow's peak. I think he's got a great look. He's very intimidating. I like his gear that he wears. His hat is always great. He just knows what he's doing. All right. Black hair. It's just it's good. It's good. It's good for the sport. All right. He's a good offensive mind, good recruiter. I think he does well with roster management. So, all these things, but he, I think, has had better teams throughout the regular season, and he came up short in, was it 2019 with that was Justin Fields' big time year.
Yes, 2019 was the 2019 that finished first in SP Plus ahead
they
of
lost
LSU.
to Clemson in the playoff. So they lost. So that year, man, they were ahead of schedule with him, but man, if they could have won that year, all this there would be no talk of like right now. My criteria for them is national championship or bust. So Clemson was dominance or bust in the ACC, and then LSU was 10 wins or bust. So I kind of built on each one. Ohio State is national championship or bust because they've done everything else. And this is the year where they're supposed to be extra angry because they lost to Michigan for the first time in forever. And Michigan's a team that I had kind of thinking about this list, but I don't know if, make or break, whatever. We're going to talk about them another day with some who's back rankings. But Ohio State, they've got the top 3 talent as far as the roster. They go back and forth with Georgia and Alabama as far as most talent on the roster, blue chip ratio, team talent composite, all those things. They're always recruiting like crazy as far as being in the top 3 or 4 every year in recruiting. And then their SP plus, the returning production is I'm just saying their expectations this year are going to be through the roof because of what their returning production is. I think they're in top 25, if I'm not mistaken, when we talked about that.
I just feel like I said they're 22.
22 for an elite team, Jacob. We talked about when Alabama was 60 a few years ago for their 2020 season. That was remarkable. Usually these elite teams are losing so much to the draft. You're looking at in the 70s to 90s range. So they're top 25 and they're SP plus because their offense is number one. And that's with losing potentially 2 first-round wide receivers and just some studs. Travion Henderson's the dude running the ball. CJ Stroud's the guy throwing the ball. I mean, we really need to see it this year. We don't need to just see them do what they need to do. They need to run the table and win the national championship this year.
Bama. Like, what if they go lose to Bama?
I'm saying that they will be out of excuses is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that he's going to get fired. I'm not saying Ryan Day is going to get fired, which I know that may be a problem with us doing make or break because none of my coaches are going to get fired this year if they don't do what I'm saying. I'm saying you're going to lose some of the fan base. I think there's some of the fan base for Ohio State that's going to be like, well, Urban, I mean, I know he sold his soul to the devil, but like he won it for us, And so it's going to be in their head and they're going to look at this guy who has put them in the playoff, 3 of the past 4 years or whatever.
Urban ticked off Saban enough to go change his entire offense and go hire Lane Kiffin the next year. I mean, that game changed Alabama football 100%.
When Ezekiel Elliott ran it through the heart of Dixie.
Yeah, that's right. Man. All right. I don't think we're going to have to worry about it. I'm very high on Ohio State this year. I'll go to a team that might fire their coach. So from the high highs, Nebraska. So and I think they made the right decision not firing Scott Frost this past offseason. But now he's got to prove it. So like Daniel, they went 3-9 last year. Do you know how many one-score games they lost last year?
Oh, probably like 6.
9. It was all 9. Ooh. All 9 of their losses were by 1 score. So it's not like they're not playing these games. And if you take into account Bill Conley's post-game win expectancy, so basically you insert in all the same stats and it spits out like likelihood you win the game, 8-4. Like they had a post-game win expectancy above 60% in 8 of their games, and they only won 3. Like the Illinois game when they lost like 30-22, they had a 94% post-game win expectancy. Like they should not have lost that game. Crazy, crazy stuff happened week in and week out last year for Nebraska. Before that, you had the COVID year, which we saw in the Big Ten messed it up a lot more in the Big Ten than it did in other conferences, maybe the Pac-12. But all that being said, it's year 5 for Scott Frost. I think they made the right call giving him this year. Like, I really think you can write off 2020 as COVID. This past year, you can point to like the scores and be like, we're really this close in every game. But now you got to do something about it. Like, they have to go to a bowl game this year. Like, at the minimum, I think 7-5 would back off the fan base a little bit to like buy them a couple of years. And I think by next year, you're going 8-4, 9-3. I mean, the Big Ten West is wide open. So, like, I mean, go win 8 games this year. Just go win 8 games and get everybody off your back. Because I think looking back, no one questioned the Scott Frost hire when it happened. In fact, everyone was like, home run. I said home run. You got to think he was coming off of the undefeated national championship season at UCF. Like, he played a quarterback at Nebraska. He comes off of that. And beyond that, they had like several good years in a row. He come off the undefeated year, comes home, and he took them from 0-12 to 14-0 at the Peach Bowl. Like, so huge turnaround. Nebraska's, prodigal son returns.
Right.
And hasn't done anything with it. So it's a make or break year for Scott Frost in Nebraska. I hope he does really well. I really do. But if they don't make a bowl game, I think he's done. And I think at that point, like you said, no excuses. Like 5 years in, you can't make a bowl. No excuses.
Wait, who did they just get at quarterback? They just got a transfer.
Give me 2 seconds.
I almost want to say Connor Bazelak, but he went to Indiana. For some reason, it's somewhat similar to him.
Chuba Purdy. There was another one though, wasn't it?
I thought so.
Casey Thompson. Yes, from Texas. That's the one.
From Texas. Yeah. That's it. Casey Thompson, because he's got the NIL deal with the collective or whatever from Nebraska. So, yeah.
Hey, and he's a Mackenzie Milton type quarterback that he had at UCF. So,
and he was good down the stretch with Texas, twice. So, much less expectations. Maybe he can kind of light it up a little bit over there. So, hey, we'll see.
Those are some good lists. I think those are some good, and for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, and I like when we do that, where we kind of set our own individual. Hey, you run with whatever your interpretation of this is, because mine, I literally listed 3 teams who've won recent national championships, whose coaches will not be fired.
No, none of those are getting fired this year.
So that's awesome,
man. Well, we will be back again next week. More topics to talk about in the off season. We're going to have a little who's back. So our one reoccurring segment we do every year, where the 8 teams.
It's such a good idea to start with that we just are sticking with it.
Look, 8 teams that have previously been nationally prominent that either until recently or haven't been anytime recent. We're going to have to vote on it next week. I might kick one team off the list and say they're no longer eligible for who's back because they've been relevant too often. So we'll see. But it was our number 1 team last year, if you listened. But we'll have to get to it. We'll have to get to it next week. But one of our favorite segments, who's back? It's 8 different teams that the fan base is always clamoring. When will they be back? So maybe it's a hint of who those teams could be.
All these teams have moved in the past year, I feel like. So
the list.
I went back and looked at our list from last year, so it should be interesting.
And we were really, really wrong on one team. Well, maybe not, but they proved themselves. So anyway, that will be next week. And you can follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. And that will do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob.